Hello, welcome to our November 3rd, 2023 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host. I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. I work as a product specialist, basically in marketing for Yamaha Corporation of America, which is the U.S. distributor of Steinberg products, and I'll be the host of the live stream today. This will be a different format than our typical live streams. So what we're going to do is kind of take a detailed walkthrough of the new version of Cubase that was released yesterday, Cubase 13. So I may not be answering questions like we typically do in a live stream where people ask and then we kind of go through and go through different stuff. This will be more of kind of in the format of a product presentation. We will resume going back to our normal format, kind of answering questions, in our typical format starting on Tuesday's live stream, but this will be just kind of a slightly different format for that. I also, it was wonderful to see everyone on the Zoom social meetup on Tuesday, and I want to give a special thanks to Tim Hinckley for sharing his insights with everyone and about his career, so it's always really fascinating to hear. So with that, we will go ahead and start with our, and we'll go through, I'll take maybe a quick little break to see if we can if there's, questions that kind of pop up, but we'll try to get through a lot of information and kind of detailed and showing you kind of the intentions of design intentions that kind of went into Cubase 13. So I know Steinberg's really happy to have it released and to be able to, and I'm happy to kind of share with you some typical workflow stuff. All right, now as we start, a couple of the things are for the Windows platform. Specifically, I'm presenting from a Mac. I didn't want to interrupt the space-time continuum and do remote access to a PC while doing a live stream, so I did kind of a quick video that I will narrate some of the different aspects for you. So one of the things that we will see initially is kind of different Windows handling. So it's going to be a Windows compliant multi-window handling. So we'll go ahead and I'll just play a little bit of this video. If I just take it out of full screen mode. Okay. All right, so on the Windows platform, there's a couple things that will be specific to the Windows platform. So one will be our kind of the multi-window support. So it's going to be Windows compliant multi-window support. So as we kind of go between different areas, let me get my video playing here, get my keyboard set up. All right, so I'll open up the video window here just to kind of show. Okay, so, one of the things you'll see is kind of, different interface enhancements, but as we switch between different windows, what's going to happen is when we have like the mixer, if we have the channel strip editor, the key editor, let's say the Vari Audio editor, notation editor, we can alt tab between all of these different active windows. So that way we could just easily navigate to different parts of the program. We could also, if you want to right click, we could hide the menus. So if you wanted to hide the menus just by simply right clicking, One of the other aspects that has changed is with our hybrid CPUs, so the hybrid i9 CPUs. If you have an 8 plus core system, you can have different functions for how the processors will be scaled across the systems. So it will take advantage of all of the, multi-processors. There's some new algorithms for that. And as we exit programs, something that will be a little different is if you close all the windows to actually quit the program, you would need to click on from the hub, because if there's no other windows and the menu is hidden, at that point you would see the quit Cubase from the hub. So you could just simply exit the program that way. So those are a couple of things that are kind of Windows specific with that. Now when we want to look at the overall project window, you'll see that there's a lot of different functionality and a lot of GUI issues that were kind of inconsistent, and maybe were added over time. For instance, if we wanted to look at the inspector. So the inspector started off with, initially with the Atari version had one inspector panel, and then it gets to the point where we have multiple inspector panels. Now we have a lot of different windows that could be set up, and we would have, I believe that there was just like 6 little settings cogwheels throughout the main project window. When in doubt, you'll see a lot of those have been removed, but when in doubt, you can now just simply right click and go to specific sections. So you could right click, and now you'll see kind of the setup section. So if I go up here, I could right click. If I go to my different areas of the program, again, right click, and those different functions will automatically be shown. Now as we do this, there's a lot of attention paid to detail for contrast, and so that stuff can be more easily read, so things aren't kind of demurred or kind of more subtle in appearance, so it's easier to see stuff. And it's one of the common themes that I think you'll see within Cubase 13 is that you'll be able to access more information, or the same information with a lot less windows, a lot less clicking that are going on. When we want to look at the inspector, as we mentioned before, the inspector was greatly overhauled. We can come over and choose to widen the inspector now, but we could have multiple tabs open, and we don't have to close one tab to open another tab. So multiple tabs can be selected like this. When we want to come over and change colors, we used to have like the little color pop out wheel here. You can now hold down the Alt. So if we hold down the Alt key, we can now scroll with your mouse wheel just to change colors like that. If you wanted to use your color tools, those will work the same way, but there's no little pop out color window. So Alt or Option, and now you can scroll along here. If we have, let's say, a MIDI or instrument track, when we go to our top settings here, we can now even, like a lot of things that weren't very obvious, we can come over here and see, okay, I want to edit in place. I wanted to close that. One of the things for instrument tracks or MIDI tracks that were routed, to a MIDI track that was routed to a virtual instrument, we can now access very easily all of the audio characteristics directly here from the instrument track. Now, one of the things that's also been aided was a lot of the windows. Kind of when we look at that, if we had inserts on a particular track, we would see 15 empty insert slots. Now our inserts will just automatically be in kind of a +1 mode, so it will only show you the number of inserts that you have +1, so that you could add additional insert slots, and this way you're not seeing 2/3 of the window being eclipsed because you opened up the inserts. So again, you can, if we wanted to go to our channel EQ, We can now just click, and as we make adjustments here, we can see that we have the pre-section. So a lot of people have asked on live streams, is there a way in the inspector to switch to polarity or add gain or my low cut, high cut filters? We can now do all of that directly here. And as I move the mouse away, you notice that the window just immediately disappears for us. So if we wanted to, again, come over here, and I'll just undo some of my mixer changes. So all of this can be handled very easily using our different commands here. We also wanted to have the experience to be able to have every audio channel characteristic. So when we would open up a particular channel, we could say, okay, we want to click on the E button. So if I want to see inserts, my channel strip, all of the functions, everything in the audio signal path, we've now added a dedicated channel inspector. So we could go to the upper right hand corner and we will see our channel inspector come right here. So a lot of people, if you're doing primarily audio, may just choose to go with the audio channel inspector. This will have our little pop out EQ again, so move it away. If I wanted to do routing, my pre-section, and again, we could adjust all of your phase, add gain directly there. If we wanted to go to our inserts, and the channel strips have also been changed as well. So let's say as we go to our channel strip, instead of opening up, by default when you open up the channel strip in the main mix console, it would open up to the EQ. It would be very tall vertically. So now if we wanted to turn on a channel strip component, we could click on it. And as we click on it again, we'll see the little kind of pop out editor that will allow us to do editing on the particular channel strip and have access. And if I wanted to change the signal flow order, just come right over there and change the signal flow. If we have this being sent to and even if we wanted to look at one other thing I'll point out that is really slick, I think, with the editor. So let's say if we go to a routing area on a particular instrument, we could actually see a little pop-up of the instrument. So if I just wanted to immediately open up the user interface for the particular instrument, we could just click right over there. So all of the different functions, and as we could separate our fader. So if I wanted my fader to be super tall, I wanted different components, we could scroll up and down. It just allows you to see more information, again, in less space. We'll come over here. If you wanted to, again, pick and choose what sections that you want to see included, which will be in the lower zone, which will be in the upper zone. You can just come over here and choose the different components by right-clicking. So we wanted this channel and this kind of user interface consistency to be applied into our full mix console as well. So this way, when we go to our full mix console, we'll just open it up and we can see that the appearance here is changed. We could access our left and right zones. Again, just kind of right click in different areas to choose what will be active. So again, if we wanted to see the labels are much easier to read, we can see that we have channel names at the top. If we wanted to open a particular instrument, we could kind of just hover over and see our different tracks at the bottom. So looking at our pre-section, our inserts, we could choose whether we want these all to be a +1. We have our channel EQ. So again, just clicking on the EQ, we get kind of the fold away. My channel strips are much more accessible. So now opening up the channel strip doesn't take 2/3 of the space. And again, click here and we see all of our channel strip components. So if I don't want to see that, we can come over and, let's go to our channel strip, EQ sends, and notice that I can now scroll up and down very easily to navigate between different sections. We can see our direct routing. So if I wanted to change that, move that up and down. Now sometimes in previous versions, if I started here and I had an EQ and I scrolled and I was hovering over a particular parameter, that parameter could get adjusted by my scrolling with the mouse. That could increment or decrement or alter the values. So now if we wanted to come over, we could just go to the preferences, and once we come to our preferences, we'll go to editing and we'll choose project and mix console, and then you'll see that the scroll wheel, the vertical scrolling, is going to be, we could disable it for channel parameter design. So without that turned on, if I scroll up and down, we could just easily navigate. And again, we can come over here, and after a while, I know it looks different kind of when you first started from previous versions of Cubase, but the intelligibility is took me a day or two to kind of get used to it, but I think overall the intelligibility is really improved. I remember doing a seminar where the people couldn't read the values on the particular meters here for when you wanted to look at the RMS, your master peak level, some of those settings were kind of demurred and weren't as easy to read, but now we can just come over and easily kind of change all of the settings and make it easier to view. So, and again, we'll just come over here. We will have our kind of full mixer capability. So we'll see that even the panning is much easier to see, the icons for the different buttons. And again, you could just now click here, hover over if you hold the mouse down and let go, and open up the virtual instrument directly from the mixer. So very easy to navigate, very clean, and again, kind of consistent user interface designs between the channel strip and the mixer, so that they don't seem like they were written in different decades. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some different plugins. So when we look at plugins, there's we've had people on the live stream have asked for various plugins. So let's say I wanted to open up just an instance of Groove Agent here. So we'll just open this up and let's say we'll play. All right, so let's go to our inserts. So one of the new plugins that we will have is going to be one called a new compressor plugin called Black Valve. So when we look at this, we'll just go ahead and turn it on. And it's kind of a very easy, simple compressor to use. We can see our peak reduction, and this way we kind of move it clockwise. And as we come over, we could do significant amount of peak reduction. What kind of makes this plugin unique is a drive circuit. So as we look at this, we'll come over and just go to our drive. And this way we could add kind of harmonic distortion directly into the plugin path. So if you want it to be very clean but compressed, very nicely compressed, or if you want it to add a bit of grit into the compression, you could do that as well. Another plugin that people had requested on various live streams was having a passive EQ. So we'll now give you kind of a Pultec style EQ. So, and what makes this EQ unique is, it's a very simple conceptual EQ. You could boost frequencies, it's basically broken into like two bands. So we could boost our lows. And this seems very subtle, and you could attenuate the lows. But what's interesting is these are at slightly different frequencies, and this is what makes the Pultec so desirable, is that you could boost the low frequency and attenuate a slightly different frequency. So if I want to do that for my low end, and I could also do this for my high frequencies. So let's say we want to attenuate. So these are slightly different frequencies, so we could boost and we could change the frequency here. So we could have this kind of paradigm of a classic Pultec style EQ that's built in. Very easy to kind of dial in different sounds. Now another plugin in kind of this same vein is the EQ M5. And what this will give you is, again, different capabilities we're doing. So we'll have our low frequency boost. This will have a mid-range, and we could attenuate the mid-range frequency, and we'll have our high frequency and our high frequency boost. So this would basically have boost on the lows and highs and attenuation in the mids. So again, kind of another classic paradigm of working with various kind of classic EQs. So you don't have to go out and buy these inside of Cubase or outside, to use inside of Cubase when you want that EQ flavor. Another EQ that's been added is going to be we'll have kind of a classic style EQ. Let's come over here to part disappeared. But if we wanted to, I'll just reload the project here real quick. Might have out-clevered myself. We want to have kind of a really high quality vocal compressor. So we'll show that. Just find my okay. So if I wanted to come over, let's see if I could get my visibility, see if I have it. Okay. All right, so let's look at, looks like my part may have disappeared. So if we wanted to also just do a particular so we have just, set up for a vocal compressor. I'll just do it on this drum event here. So as we want to look at, so I'll just do it on this loop here. Sorry, I had a file prepared for this. And as we want to come over here, we could, again, just go to the inserts. And as we go to the inserts, under dynamics, we can come over and just see a compressor. So we'll see our Vox comp, and this would be kind of almost a very opposite type of file. So as we want to apply compression, we go counterclockwise. So if I want to take this and apply the different compression, we would just go counterclockwise, and that's going to be set up specifically for different. It's going to be set up for different, vocals. Let me open up a different file, and I'll show this other plugin. quickly. And one of the things that we wanted to do is also just to make it where we could actually find a particular, just open up different file here. All right, so let's come over and let's say if we wanted to do like particular vocal processing on a file, what we could do now is come over and I'll just take off all the processing on this particular file. And one of the things that we wanted to do was a lot of times people could have different files that will be, different plugins to come up with a vocal sound. And we wanted to simplify this process, again, kind of showing more, showing the same amount of information but in less space and presenting it differently. So when we want to come over here, we go to vocals and we have a vocal chain. So what this is going to allow us to do is as we work with the vocal chain, this is going to be basically like 16 different plugins on one particular plugin. So when we look at this, we could say, let's just see how this. Your heart shone through. It caught my breath. So what we could have is 16 different processes. We could come over here and scroll through our different processes. So we could have kind of cut filters. So if you wanted to do a high pass filter, if you wanted to do pitch correction, you could choose it to be chromatic or major minor scales. If you wanted to apply de-essers, and there's kind of clean and character modes, we can now come over and have kind of dynamic filters as well. So if you want to do, instead of having to have a dynamic EQ, this could be just accessed directly in here. We'll have a compressor, and if you wanted to choose between different types of compressors, we can come over here and just have our different choices of compressors. So if we wanted the black valve compressor, extreme, transparent, or using the Vox comp, the one that we just saw, we have our EQ window. We can come over here and have an exciter to bring out the harmonic content to make it sound a little brighter. If we wanted saturation, if we wanted to have compression, so this would be in the character. If we wanted to have dynamic filters again, if we want to have a second stage of EQ, a second de-esser. And when we come over here, we can now say we could have an imager. We could also just add delays. So if I'm here, we could just add our delay and say, okay, I want to come here. I want to add a reverb. And as we work with this, so all of this processing, instead of utilizing multiple plugins, stacked, where you could take 16 insert slots for one particular vocal, we could do this and access it all from one particular file. There's also been a just a new update to a particular plugin. So if we wanted to look at a plugin, we'll just add a quick track here, kind of an oldie but goodie that's been updated. So we'll add an audio track. And as we look at this, we can just say, okay, I wanted to add the test tone generator. So if we wanted to come here as an insert effect, we can go to your tools, and this has also been updated. So we go to our test generator. Here we could now, generate, if we wanted to generate sweeps, different noise profiles. So if you want pink, gray, violet, blue, brown, white noise, so kind of an update to this, we could have sweeps going on as well. So a nice addition to that. Now, one thing that people have asked for repeatedly over the years is, let's say I have my vocal file here and I want it to have, it's a mono file.
Waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home.
So if I go to an insert slot, we'll come over and say I want to put a reverb on. And we'll come over, so we'll put a Revelation reverb on. Now, since this is a mono track, we put it into a mono insert.
You looked my way and your heart shone through. It caught my breath.
So I'll bring this down. And what that will do is actually make...
Well, leave now, I'm so in love with you.
That makes all of the insert channels, that will make all of the inserts work in mono because it's a mono track. Now what we could do is come over and we'll see our channel configuration right here, and we could choose to take that from mono to stereo. So now that we look at it, and as we listen to it,
my breath while you called me,
we can hear that the reverb is in stereo.
Well, leave it now, I'm so in love with you.
If we go back to mono, now our effects will be back in mono. So a long-standing feature request was just to be able to switch the track from mono to stereo.
Long time ago.
So we can now do that quite easily with Cubase. Now there's a lot of other little enhancements that have been added as well. So when we look at this, we'll say, I want to, do something simple as adding tracks, right? Something that we do all the time using our DAW. So when we go to add particular tracks, we will say, okay, I'm going to come over and we click on add track. So now some enhancements with this. When we go to add a MIDI track, we could set which MIDI input port that we see. When we go to add an instrument track, and on the MIDI tracks, we could also set the channel before the track is added. We can also come over and choose to do the same thing with our sampler track, so we can add different MIDI inputs. Our instrument tracks, we could add different inputs as well. Now, when we go to another enhancement that people had been wanting for a while was, let's say we start here and I have like my bass and a drum part here. So now if I wanted to take this bass part and send it out as audio to be captured, in previous versions we would have to send it to a particular group. But now what we could do is I'm going to come over, let's add an audio track, and we will set the input coming from our track instruments, and we'll say bass. So now I'm going to hit add track. I will come over here just as we hit play, and I'll just record, enable that particular track. And now the instrument is being routed directly to the audio track without having to add an intermediary group or output channel. So it just kind of simplifies things greatly, just to be able to use the audio outputs from the instrument right into the particular audio track. So that way it's very easy to simplify, and if you're creating templates, you could have like capture tracks very easily done. Now you may have noticed in a couple areas when we go to add a MIDI track, or we look at our MIDI inputs for tracks, that things have been kind of reorganized. We will see that we could, before everything would show up in one kind of monster list, now I could see all of my plugins that I could use for my MIDI input. Or if we wanted to come over here, all of my input ports coming from my Panorama Nectar controller. So this way everything, the MIDI I/O will be kind of reorganized to make it easier and more accessible, so that if you wanted to add a MIDI track, and I wanted the MIDI track to come in from, let's say, we go to our plugins and we say, okay, I want this coming in from my Groove agent or coming in from, different tracks. We can just come over and see and very easily organize exactly without having to read through a huge list to find a correct MIDI port as well. Now, there's been a lot of attention paid to small little things that could, radically improve your overall workflow. So one of those would be zooming. All right, so as we look at zooming, we can come over here. Most of us know that if we use our scroll wheel, we can go up and down using our mouse scroll wheel. If we hold down our Shift key, we can navigate horizontally. So we could go up and down, hold down the Shift modifier key, we can now scroll horizontally. If we hold down our scroll, if we use our scroll wheel with our Control key, we could zoom horizontally. Now, what we couldn't do before was using the scroll wheel to zoom vertically. So now if we hold down Control or Command with our plus the Shift key, we can now navigate vertically just like so. So again, I could go up and down, left to right with the Shift key, Control to zoom horizontally, and Control or Command plus Shift to now zoom vertically. So very easy to do that. Now let's say I want to look at my audio waveform. If I hold down Control or Command plus Alt or Option while I use the scroll wheel, we can zoom the amplitude of the waveform, which is basically this control. So if you just come over, hold down again, Control or Command plus Alt or Option, we can now just zoom the amplitude. Now, in previous versions of Cubase, if we had our mouse, like our playhead, set right here, and we hit the G or H keys, at that point, the playhead would be kind of the anchor point as we hit the G and H keys to zoom in and zoom out. So as we would do that, it's going to be based on the actual keys. But now there's a new preference. So if we come over here to our preferences, we can say, let's go to preferences, and I want to go to my zoom settings. We see that the zoom has been kind of consolidated into the preferences, but there's now a function for use selection start as zoom anchor. So if my cursor is over here, and in previous behavior, when we zoomed in, I may zoom into nothing relevant. But if I have an event selected, now when I zoom in and zoom out, that will be the anchor point. So if I select an event and zoom in, that's now the anchor, and that will override unless no event is selected. Then the play position is the anchor. With an event selected, that now becomes the anchor point. All right, now there's also some new transport start mode. So a couple of questions I've seen is, in previous versions, we would go to our preferences to transport, and we had an option for return to start position on stop. This wasn't the most intuitive place to find this, but over years people have migrated to there. So we now have a new concept of transport start mode. So we go to our transport menu, we can come right over here and we have what we call start modes. So here we could say start from the project cursor position. So as I hit play, it's just going to play from the project cursor position. So stop, I move my project cursor to there, and it plays right from there. If we wanted to do our return to start point, instead of having to go into the preference and search for the preference, we can now go to our transport to start mode, and we would say return to start position on stop. So now if I start playing from measure 21 and then I hit the spacebar to stop, it goes directly back to measure 21. Without that enabled, what happens is when we stop, it would stop right where we go and continue on from there. So the return to start position has moved locations to the transport start modes. Now there's some other options here as well. So let's go to our start mode and we'll say start from selection start. So if my playhead is here and I have this event selected, it'll now start playing from that particular event. If we wanted to have it follow our cycle markers, we could go to our transport to start modes and we'll say start from cycle start. So if I'm here, now it's just going to go wherever I'm at. I hit the spacebar, it's going to play directly from the cycle locators. Our other options will include, we could say, okay, I want to go from the selection start, but now we can say start from selection or cycle start. So if no event is selected, so if an event is selected, it starts from there. If no event is selected, it starts from the cycle. So this way, if you're doing editing on a particular thing, you select it, you don't have to rewind the playhead to go directly to that spot or set left and right locators. You just click on it and then the playhead will follow you automatically. All right, there's also been some great enhancements with marker tracks. So we get this question a lot on live streams of, okay, I've added markers, I created a cycle marker, and then, why is it hard to name the particular markers? So if I come here, I created the markers. Now I want to give them a name, and what people would have to do is open up, you go to Control M, open up your marker window, and now just type them a name so that you could see the markers laid out for you. So this process we wanted to simplify. So to do that, what we could do now is as we add a marker, hold down the Shift key. So we drop a marker in, the name field appears automatically. So we say, isn't this easier? And to add a cycle marker with a name, hold down Control or Command plus the Shift key and drag. And now you've added the cycle marker, and you can now just type in the description right away. So again, things like this that you constantly have to rewind, constantly fast forward, constantly navigate to transport, going into a different window to name the markers, we can do directly on the particular events. We also get asked a lot about, naming of events as well. And this has been enhanced. So we will come over here to just find okay, so let's say we have, we did the fatal flaw of not naming our particular audio files before we record. So I have 3 files here, and a lot of us will see this on our projects where you're just in the heat of the battle, and you'll say, let's go to audio 1, audio 2, audio 3, whatever we want to call these. Now at times we may want to select events, and now we could go to edit and rename. So we'll see our rename, and I could say, let's rename the selected events. So you say these are guitar solos. And now we could rename the particular event. If we have multiple tracks selected, we go to edit to rename, and we'll say rename first selected track. And we'll say take 1 solo, good. And now I could hit the tab key that will take me to the naming field of the next track and say, not great, ignore. And then once you're here again, just hit the tab key once you have that done, and you could just come right over here and type in another description like so. So we could rename the events, we could rename the tracks, but now we could also, if we go into our pool window, We could say I want to rename the event. So if I select the event in my pool or media bay, we can go to our edit and choose rename, and we could rename the audio file just that easily. So things that, were problematic before, how can I rename? Do I have to go to the info line to do it for each of the events, or how do I rename the track easily? We could use the rename function for that. When we also have a lot of flexibility that has been kind of introduced with hit points and navigation as well. So I'm going to make sure I have this set up. All right, so when we have an event, such as a drum part, and we wanted to navigate, to the next hit point, we could always use the key commands like Alt or Option plus N or B. So this would take us to the next track, or to the next hit point, and this would take us to the previous hit point. But if we had the range tool selected, so let's say I wanted to select a particular range, there wasn't a way to navigate via hit point to the particular next, to navigate to the next hit point with the range. So if I have a range selected and I wanted to go to the next hit point, I would have to kind of manually do that. But now what we could do is, if we go to our edit menu and we go to select, we could see enlarge range to next event or to previous event. So once we have that done, and I've assigned these to keyboard shortcuts on my MIDI remote device, I could just come over here and I could extend the range selection to the next or to the previous hit point. So if I say, okay, I want to take that range and move it there, or I want to take that particular range, knowing that it's aligned to the particular hit points, hold down my Alt or Option key and be able to just come over and move that particular range. Now once I have my range set up, so let's say I have my range and I want to adjust the start and end positions, I could hit like even Shift X, and once I've done that, it split the range. Now using the range tool before, sometimes like if we wanted to select the event after we've cut it, using the range tool and especially if you're doing this in macros, was really tricky. So I have this range selected, so I'm going to switch to my selection tool. So with the range active on the event, I switched to the selection tool, and now that event is actually selected. So it makes it much easier to do different things. So again, when I come over here, select a range, and I split the particular range, come here, Shift X, and now switch. I can just hit 1 to switch to my selection tool. That range is then selected for you automatically. Now another thing that was added, and this comes in handy when it's like doing different sample libraries, is let's say if I have this event selected in a range, before we had the function where we could extend the range to the end or start of the particular event. So if I wanted to fill the space, I could select that particular range. Now, why is that useful? Now, we could do something really interesting. It's been added by going into our audio menu and choosing bounce selection. And we choose bounce selection. And now what that's done is it's created an audio file that has silence at the end. So if you need all of your audio files to be the same exact length, we could use the range tool and just do a bounce selection, and that could add silence but still have it within the particular audio event, which is handy if you're doing like lots of little one-shot samples and you need them to be like a consistent uniform length with that. Now we saw that, when we are in the MIDI remote and we want to assign particular functions, there's a couple of minor enhancements with the MIDI remote. So if I wanted to assign particular functions, let's say I'm here and I wanted to assign a function for this particular event here. So let's say I want this button to come over and we will delete a particular event. So I'll just come over here. We could choose delete. All right, I'll type it in correctly. All right, so we can say I just want to come here to edit to delete, and I could apply that mapping. So what happened, a lot of times people would come over here, and then when they want to, do that particular function, so let's say you would have to exit out of the mapping page for that to take effect. So now we could come over here, and if you're just kind of trying different mappings and different functions, we can now assign and execute that function without having to close the particular mapping page. Also, now if we're in our particular event, we could right click on an object on our MIDI remote and just say remove mapping. So we don't have to necessarily go into the whole mapping page. Again, right click and you could remove the mapping that easily. One thing that I really appreciate is the new key commands dialog. So a lot of people that are on live streams will see that there are, will see me generate custom key commands to create macros. So this has been kind of updated as well. So we have a new key command window. So as we look at the key commands, we could see all of our key commands. We could see all the key commands that are kind of assigned. We could see all of them that have been customized, so like user defined. We could see key commands now that are unassigned. So we could search. Now as we search for functions, let's say if I want to come over here and I want to search for snap, I could just go to the search field and type in snap, and we will see all of our snap functions. So, but if I wanted to search for like what a key command does, if I click on the keyboard here, we can now just say, oh, what does J do? And that will automatically select the particular function. So you could search by key command or search based on the actual or just the name of the particular function. Now this is also a modal window, so I could now come over here and do edits and move stuff around without having to close the window. So that makes it very nice for doing a lot of design. Now I really appreciate kind of the new, we'll just do a quick, and let's show you how easy it is to create like a new macro. So one of the macros I made was really tricky to do because of the switching from a range selection to a selection. And with that change in the editing paradigm, let's say if I wanted to create, a big macro that I made a lot of people have, it's called a minimize breath macro. And what it could do is just come over and take the range selection and drop it down by 12 dB. So you could, in essence, kind of select the breath and come over here and drop that volume. So let's go ahead and create a new macro, and we'll show how easy this is to do. So we'll come over. All right. So we'll come over here, let's just find our all right, so we see new macro here. So what we want to do is to add functions. So let's say the first thing I want to do in this macro is to split events. So I'm going to come over here and hit my key command is Shift plus X. So what is that function? So I'm going to split the range. Let's add the command. I want to now switch to the object selection tool. I know that's the one key. So I'm going to come over here, hit the keyboard, hit 1, and then we'll just say let's add that command. I want to search, I think we want to take down the volume, so it's under decrement, event volume. So I'm going to add this like 12 times. And let's just choose a function for select none. So select that and let's add the command. So as we scroll, we will see this is our macro. Now my favorite aspect of the new macro and key command editor, something I lobbied for, was to actually be able to run the macro from here. So as you're building a macro, you don't have to close the window, go over to your edit menu to find the macro. But here I could just say, now I just want to come right over here. And so if I did this right, we could take this range selection and drop it by 12 dB. So that easy, that's simple to work with. So again, once you start working with macros, building key commands, that's when you really get into really accelerating your particular workflow. All right, so as we work with tempo settings, one of the things that we also wanted to simplify was handling of tempo. So let's say we have our tempo track. I'll just kind of come right over here. All right, so let's say we're listening to our tempo. Let me just come over here and we'll select that. All right, so let's say we have like drums. So right now, let's say I don't have my tempo track active, and I just kind of want to find, like, I want to listen to it and just set the tempo manually. So on our transport, there's a new button here called tap. So as we come over, we'll just say, all right, and let me just, all right, so while we're, let's see if I, all right, I'll just do it with, all right, so I'll just drag these events over. All right, so let's say I want to set an initial tempo value. So what I could do now is while I'm playing, I'll just come over here and say, oh, I want it to be a little faster. I'll just click with my mouse. And now we could just set the tempo. Okay, I want it to be slower. So again, I'll just come here and say, I want it to be this speed. And just tap a couple times. And now you could just have the tempo set that easily. All right, now let's say with the tempo track active, I want to come over, and as we work with our tempo track, and I'll just move these two tracks up so we can see these together. All right, now let's say I have an event selected. So, and we have our tempo track. So once we have the tempo track activated, the tempo track can switch to different values. So if I have an actual event selected with the tempo track turned on, I hit tap tempo. It will now put that tempo change at the start of the event. If we want it to, so as we come over here, let's say while we have it, so if where my cursor is, if I wanted to come over, we could insert it with no event selected. If I wanted to put a tempo change here, wherever my cursor is, I could just tap and we can see the tempo change automatically go right there. If we start playing from this position while the tempo track is active and we do a tap tempo, and we're going to start from measure 3, I can just, or let's say we'll start from our playback. I'll just move this to measure 3 for now. All right, so where I started from, I'm just going to tap. And now it will, so while it's playing, wherever I started playing, we could just hit the tap tempo button and it will write that tempo value right there. So I know so many film composers, like the first thing they do is they watch the scene, and I've seen so many of them just sit there and tap what they think the pulse of the tempo is. And now you could just click on tap and tap the tempo in to set your tempo for various spots. So whether you want it to be globally without the tempo track, based on events, based on a cursor position, or based on the play position. So very easy to kind of work with that to, do different tempo changes and be a little more free with your tempos. All right, so let's take a look at working with video. So video has also been enhanced. So let's look at our video track. So one of the age-old problems is different picture changes for video. So I'm going to come over here, and let's say you get a video file that you're composing to, and this is the final edit. And you're happy because you don't want to necessarily compose to an entire video and then have changes come that will make you change the music. All right, so this is your final edit. You're ready to deliver. You've done all the compositions. You've matched all the points with different hits in the film. You're proud, and then inevitably you get, oh, sorry, there's a picture change. So now we have track versions on video tracks. So we could come over here and say, oh, this is the final edit, right? So you do all this, and instead of having, like 2 video tracks where we could have kind of the original and working, we can now just come over here and, we could have track versions. So we could say final edit, and this is the final edit. So at this point, instead of having to load up different projects or work with different tempo files, different videos on the same track and have all the content move over, we could just have track versions. So this came as a feature request from Ludwig Göransson's team. So track versions on video. Now, when we want to see some of the other things that we'll see on the Windows platform, we're also going to be supporting GPU hardware for decoding H.264 videos, and you're going to see kind of overall kind of better support for different aspect ratios and better, more true color support during the video playback. One of the things that's also changed is when we go to export video. At this point, we could say, okay, I want to export my video. In previous versions, we could render new video files, and this could give you kind of a rather large video format. And if you don't need to have changes, we could also just come over here and do a replace audio and video. So this will take kind of the same video file itself. You could give it a new name, and at this point it will take the original file size of the video and you could replace the audio in a new, distinct, separate video file that you could use for delivery. Now, if you needed to have different resolution formats for your video as you're composing, you could have the different video files on different track versions. So if you say, okay, I need an HD version to compose to, but I've converted the video to a smaller deliverable format, at this point you could switch to a different track version on a video, and then when you deliver it, you could deliver a full resolution, much larger file, or just a replace audio and video file, which would be much smaller. So for this test, I just did like a 4-minute video, and it went from a size of 700 megabytes to 40 megabytes. So this way you have different options, whether you want to render the particular video as a brand new file, or you just want it to take the format that you're working with and deliver based on that, whether you're doing render video or replace audio in video. All right, let's take a look at chord pads have also been updated. Chord pads was something that, one of the pioneering things that Steinberg did, I think in version 8. So when we want to look at chord pads, we can see that this whole interface has kind of been redesigned. Chord pads kind of start off as a very simple thing, and then, as you do maybe a home project where you add additions, and the more you add, sometimes it doesn't connect as well. So this has been basically redesigned. So we can come over here and we could have chord pads. Now, when we start off with the chord pads, one of the things you notice is, most of the things will be consolidated into new windows. So before, we would have to double click on a pad and we would get a separate window of our chord editor. So now we can see the chord definition directly on the right side here. And we could choose for this to be a list of chords, our chord editor, or our circle of fifths. So if we wanted to rotate between those, we come over here. We could choose our circle of fifths, whether it's going to be major or minor, and then we could just kind of come over here and rotate within the circle of fifths as well. So very easy to define the chords. Now the chords before would be, like you may have a preset for C major, C sharp major, D major, E flat major, E major, F major, the same chord progressions. So one of the things that's been added is a project, kind of a root key. So if this was originally in F, we could now modulate all the chord pads to the tonal center of F, or a project root key of E, and all of the pads will transpose for us. Now, we used to see lots of icons that were on the particular pads here that people couldn't necessarily easily remember. So one of the things we wanted to do now is, let's say if I want to transpose, I hold down the shift key and just use my mouse scroll wheel to transpose. If I wanted to hold down my alt key, we could switch between different tensions, so different types of chords, to audition. And if we wanted to hold down and if we come over here, let's say I want to do so the scroll wheel will change the voice, shift modulates, and again the alt will just kind of come over here. So if I wanted to just easily navigate between our different chords, so just come here, scroll to change the voicings, shift scroll to change the transposition, and alt to change the tensions. Now we see that we have and we could do these same functions from icons here. And one of the things is we could select multiple chord pads and come over here and say, okay, I like these 4 pads, and if I wanted to change like the adaptive voicing on those, and I could select these for multiple pads at once, or we could select all of your chord pads just by clicking right on this button. Now I see I'm sure most people here will see lots of different ads for chord packs where buy these dope chords. There's been a significant number of chord pad presets that come with it, and you could save and create your own chord pads. And again, each of these will be, you could change the project root key for. And one of the things we also want to do is you could change these chords. So you say, okay, I want this to be for piano player. I want it to be for guitar player voices. So you can see that when we play an E chord, we can get lower notes than when we play an F chord. So just based on how a guitar is set up. So we can switch between guitar player, piano player. We can also come over here and have different chord voicing. So if you want to have custom chord voicings and say, okay, I don't want any 4-note chords. I just want triads. I want to not have a root note. All these things can be easily adjusted just by clicking on the player. Now we can see that we can have playing chords, sections where we could play each of the chord voices, but there's also been a lot of patterns that have been added. So if I go directly to, let's say, a guitar voice here, we can now come over and choose a pattern. So we'll just say, we'll have guitar mappable patterns. Let's say, okay, I just want to do maybe, let's just find like a nylon guitar samba. So we could come over here and just kind of choose So let's say, okay, I want to make this in the key of So you could have different styles that will play, and then you could just simply, have those styles with your performance. Now, sometimes like when I go to Nashville, if you give chord charts to people, they may not appreciate it so much. They like something called the Nashville number system. So we could come over here and we could say our primary display type for chord symbols. Let's make it the Nashville number system. So at this point we can say, okay, our tonal center, I'll just open up a particular chord preset here. So let's say we want this, and we can say, okay, I want a 1, a flat 6, a flat 6 major 7th. So this will be our Nashville number systems that we could use to actually determine. We could also look at this and this reminds me of college, Roman numerals. So if you're doing kind of traditional orchestral music theory analysis, you can say, okay, we go to the 4 minor, the 6, the 7 chord, the 1 chord. And this way we're able to just look at the same chord information just in different ways. So let's say if now I want to come over here and let's listen to just a quick pattern, maybe like a piano pattern. I'll just come over here. Now, one of the things that we could also do if we have our particular patterns, we could say, let's show the pattern play progress. So you may not know how long a particular pattern is, but now if you look at the bottom here, we'll see the pattern progress just kind of continue. And we can see this line indicating how far we are into that particular pattern. So now, another thing that has been added is people often want to get these chords from the chord pads into the chord track. So if we want to do that, we can now even come over here and have step entry. And when we have our step entry enabled, we could look at it and say, okay, we're going to turn on step entry. We'll see kind of this blue dot indicating exactly this blue cursor here. So it's more obvious. And as I hit chords, we can now just go directly to, let's say, 2 bars over, and we could populate the chord track. And I'll turn off my cycle here. All right, so now as we put it into cycle step entry mode again, we go to our chord pads. And we can now populate the chords that way. Now let's say if we forgot a chord, we can now come over here and say, oh, I really need to put a chord in right here. So we could activate our step entry with that mode. And now as I hit a chord, it'll just shove all the other chords over. So we can now do step entry from the chord pads. So again, just kind of taking, if you're not that familiar with musical harmony, if you want to experiment with chords, the new chord pads will, can just really spark creativity for you. All right, so let's take a look at it's been some new enhancements on importing tracks from particular projects. So as we come over here, we can now select a particular project. We'll say, okay, let's take this. So some of the new things that it's going to allow you to do is, we could now replace events and parts, or we could add the events and parts. So let's say if I was coming over to, we could say I wanted to take this particular track, and we will feed it, and we could create a new track or send it to an existing track. So if I wanted to say, okay, I want this going to that particular track, we can at this point automatically put it there. If there was existing data on that, we can now add the events and other parts and not erase or overwrite the existing data. We can also choose to place this below the selected track or place it at the bottom of the track list. And if we wanted to just get a range, so let's say we had, 4 different projects of the same song, and we really liked the second chorus of the third project, and we wanted to take the second chorus of the third project and put it in, we could now import directly into selected ranges as well. So some great enhancements with that, and that will work for the import tracks or importing the track archives with very similar things. Our sampler track has also been updated, so let's take a quick look at that. All right. So when we look at our sampler track, one of the things that we will see is going to be, so we'll come over to the sampler track. We'll go to our sampler control. All right, so let's say we have, all right, so let's say I just want to come over and work with, let's say we're starting off maybe with a drum loop, very typical. Now, one of the things that we've enhanced is some new warping algorithms. So when we take a look at our audio warp here, before we had music in solo, but now we've added spectral HD, and spectral vocal. So now we have, much higher quality algorithms. So going down like 2 octaves. So for people that were looking for higher quality algorithms, they're going to be there. And there's also one that's going to be specifically designed for vocals. So if we wanted to come over here, we could choose our spectral vocal. So if I just put this into legato mode, I can now come over here. And we could come over and adjust the formants. So if I went to adjust formants, now when we have the legato mode turned on, what we could do is I'm just going to start playing the sample, and a lot of times if when we hit a new key, it starts the sample back. So if I play one note and I want to add a harmony, it starts playing the sample from the beginning, but you could activate the legato mode. And once we do this, if I just keep the first note held down or one note held down, we could play other notes and it will come in specifically at that point. Play with me all night, wanna know you inside, touch on me now. So as we play chords, play with me all night, wanna know you inside, touch on me now. We could just be very creative. Play with me all night, wanna know you inside. Play with me all night, wanna know you inside, touch on me now. And just be able to play different melodies and have a lot of control over that. When we want to build creative sounds, let's come over and say, okay, I want to have just a very simple sound with my sampler. And I want to be more creative with my sounds to make it more interesting. We'll say this isn't the most interesting sound. So we're going to go to our envelope page. And as we look at the envelope page here, let's start off with our amplifier. So I just want to do volume. So when we look at this, we can say, let's just look at, so if I wanted to do like a fade in, and let's say if I want to come here and I want to adjust the envelope, so I want more of a ramp in, where it's a little more subtle. And if I hold down Control and click, we could go back straight to, to get rid of the Bezier curve and have just a straight linear curve. So we could do that very easily. So, and if I don't like the changes, one of the things that's been added is undos within the sample editor. So I don't think that there's a keyboard shortcut for the undos, but just be aware that they are here in the upper left-hand corner. So let's say I want to now draw in some envelopes. So I could just come over to my particular envelope here, and I just want to draw in maybe a volume change. And maybe I want to get louder here for just a little bit. Okay, so if let's say I didn't like that particular mode, and I want it to, not really be affected by velocity. So right now, if I hit the key harder or softer, you hear the changes. But if I don't want that, I could go to my velocity sensitivity, set it to 0. No matter how hard or soft I hit it, it's going to play back the same sample. We could also activate tempo sync. So if I wanted to draw in envelopes, we could now see our actual sync here just on the grid. So let's say I want to draw in an envelope, and let's say right here I want to go up and down. Now we could also just select these particular, so if I wanted to select that node, and once we have the selection, I could right click and say let's invert the levels. Let's come over here and I want to tilt that up, and let's tilt this down or up. I want to increase or decrease the scale right there. I want to also come over and compress or expand the changes. Now if I want this to be a particular value here, so we see that this will be during our sustain part, and I let go of the key, we can see this change. So if I wanted to put a change just right at the very end here, we could, just move our points. But let's be a little more creative, because maybe I want to have different envelope controls. So we could have all sorts of different envelopes that are available to you. So I could just draw in an envelope, and if I wanted to put in kind of maybe a repeated envelope, I will just say let's grab something like this, and I'm going to grab my paint tool. So now as we come over here, and again we could have that, if we wanted that to be synchronized to the tempo, I'll come over here, let's put our sync on. We will now grab our paintbrush and let's just gradually increase. And let's say we wanted to add a filter. So I'm going to turn a filter on. Let's put it on, maybe a classic filter. And if we want to add like a filter, we could just come over here. You'll see like this little line on the right-hand side. And I'll just pull this out so we can see it a little better. So let's go ahead and open up the modulation so we can see this line here. And let's draw in some envelopes here for the filter. Again, let's make it sync to our tempo, and let's say, okay, I want this to be synced to eighth notes. And now as we paint in, and let's come over to pitch, and I want to adjust the pitch. And let's invert the pitch from the selection. So select a tool, right click, and let's invert the levels. So now we could take is kind of a very boring sound and, very easily. And if we wanted to apply audio warp, now as we play, we could synchronize the different pitches together with the particular envelopes. If we wanted to adjust a particular, let's say we're on our amplifier here, one of the things that we could also do if I wanted to just change it, like in one particular area, we could enable the fixed mode. And as we come, we could just say, okay, I just wanted to change that one without affecting the envelope points after it. So I'll say, let's just come here. I want to do a straight line for the volume. So this way I could do editing of envelopes without affecting the envelopes after when enabling pitch mode. So you can see you could take kind of a very, maybe a not so interesting sound. And if we go back with our unlimited levels of undo, that's where we started, and just a couple of seconds of tweaking around with the envelopes, you can get very interesting and creative results. All right, now there's also been attention paid to MIDI plugins and their appearance. So let me just find our MIDI plugins here. So let's go to our MIDI inserts. And let's go ahead and just open up a couple of them. So we can see new user interface designs for all of the plugins. Something that people had asked for on live streams was the ability in previous versions where you could just use the mouse scroll wheel to toggle between different presets. That has come back. So let's look at some of the other plugins. So we can see our quarter plugin. So these have been updated for kind of modern designs. Let's look at our MIDI control. We'll have the MIDI echo, and let's look at just one more track. I think there's one more we wanted to. So now we could have your transformer. So, all these have been, new user interfaces, more modern design, easier to work with. So even, those things that some people take for granted, will have a lot of functions. Steinberg has obviously over the years been a very, early proponent of MIDI, doing probably the longest running MIDI sequencer, I think, since 1984. A couple years ago, there's finally MIDI 2.0. So when we want to work with MIDI 2.0 parts, and a lot of it was actually kind of, Steinberg kind of pioneered the concept of MIDI 2.0 stuff with the VST 3.5 standard, where we could do note expression on particular instruments. And to enable MIDI 2.0, we would go to your preferences. And as we come over here, we'll go to MIDI, and we could choose for our high resolution MIDI. Let me see if I'm in the. So we'll go to, editing to MIDI, and then we'll see our high resolution device count. So here we could, and what this will basically do is as we look at different values, for those of us who work with MIDI, right, that you could have velocity values from 1 through 127. And if we wanted more higher resolution, what we could do For instance, with velocity, we could say, and we could go up to 3 additional decimal points after, but we could say, I want to have this be, not a velocity of 1, but a velocity of 1 could have 990 stages of velocity within the one velocity. When we go to, when we look at MIDI panning, was minus 63 to plus 64. That's now going to be minus 100 to 100. Let's go ahead and just kind of look at a particular part. So when we look at notes, we could see that when we go to look at the velocity values here, that we could have 65.486 instead of 1 through 28. So 65, that value could have up to 999 values within that particular resolution. So if we wanted to look at this also, we could see this reflected in our key editor. So if we wanted to come over here, we could see the values represented here. Pitch bend, which was confusing to a lot of people, being minus 8,192 to plus 8,192 is now minus 100 to plus 100. And again, with up to 3 decimals, up to 1,000 values in between. Now, we're seeing MIDI controllers coming out. So I think Native Instruments has just released a MIDI 2.0 controller. Chord, I saw, just announced one. I think Roland's had one for a while. Those will automatically work. As I think we'll see companies also coming out with this concept of capability inquiry. So if because we know how problematic a lot of external MIDI devices can be, like managing patches, or this device is set up as a drum machine. Why can't I connect it to the computer and have it kind of show up like a drum machine? So in the future, we'll see a lot of stuff where we have MIDI CI support is a check mark right here in preferences. So as those devices come out, it will kind of do a handshake, and the devices will be auto configured. This is still very new, so I don't know of any. There's probably some keyboards that may be doing the high resolution playback. It has been part of the VST3 spec since the beginning to be kind of very high resolution. In MIDI, we currently have 16 channels, 16 MIDI channels, but now we could have 16 groups of 16 MIDI channels. So that's been expanded as well. It's early, but VST3 was designed for high resolution before MIDI 2.0, was ever released, and we're ready for it, and we want to make MIDI more expressive, and we'll see as the hardware is kind of matches that we will, have those different elements be supported inside of Cubase so that you could get the highest MIDI functionality inside. If we don't build it, then hardware won't make it because, no sequencers are accepting MIDI 2.0 or can deal with it. Now that's not the case. So it's going to be an interesting time with that. We also have wanted to make MIDI step input easier, and this is confusing for a lot of people. So let's say if we come over when doing step input, so let's say my cursor position is at measure 22. I activate step input, and we see this friendly blue line, and this follows the cursor. So, or we could move it, but as we come over here, move the cursor, the step entry point is tied with that. They're coupled together. It was independent before and a bit confusing. And one of the things that has made a big difference now is when we were doing step input before, what would happen is it would do it based on the note on message. So if your quantized value here was set to quarter note, as you played in, it would automatically input the quarter note for you. But now what we could do, it's going to be based on the note off message. So as I come here, I haven't released the note. And we can see it kind of indicated right here that the note is still being held. And then when I release the note is when the note gets added. I play a different note, and let's say I hit the right arrow key. I could change the rhythm. Now let's say, oh, I hit the wrong note there. Now what happened before, if we would hit undo, the cursor position would stay at the same spot. So now when I hit undo, it goes back to its previous spot so that now I can hit. So let's say I made a mistake, I hit two notes at once, just undo. So we could come over here, hit the space bar to give it a spot. So now we can, as we hit the left and right arrow keys, we can just change the rhythm as it's being entered. Now, it was a request by, I think, Alan Silvestri. That's how he wanted to work. And one of the things that's also been added was this capability of, let's say, as we're doing this, and let's say I played a single line in. And now at this point, I want to take it out of step mode. We can put it into MIDI mode here. I'm going to replace. And we'll see that as we do this, I can now take the existing, let's say I just played a rhythm in, and now I want to actually add chords, but still maintain the same rhythm. So we see that as I did that, it replaced the actual notes that were there. If I want to keep those notes in line, so let's say, okay, I want this, we could click on this little lock key, and now I could just say, okay, I want to play and keep the existing chords. And as I play chords, I could do polyphonic replacement of the chords and still keep the same existing note that was there already. So this way you can, much easier to change rhythms, much easier if you make a mistake, and much easier to do polyphonic replacement with the new step entry modes. One other thing that's been helpful to help with MIDI is to make sure that we have MIDI reduction. So let's say I want to come here and I want to record modulation data. So I could put my Cubase in record here. So as we look at it, we will now just come over, I hit record, and we see that there's a lot of lines going on there. Now that I stop it, it has automatically reduced the MIDI, like the amount, and we'll do the interpolations so that it makes editing so much easier. So there's kind of automatic reduction of the MIDI CC data. So really great for not clogging up MIDI data streams and simplifying editing. One of my features I've been lobbying for Steinberg for a long time was this next one, and this is adding a new tool in the editors where we can say this is our range selection tool. So before we had a object selection, so we could select particular notes. And if we wanted to move them, we could just use our arrow keys. We could hit shift plus arrow down and up to move them an octave. No problem. But now what we've added was a range selection tool, because sometimes I may have notes, but I may want to actually work on a particular range. So when we want to come over here, let's say I want to select a range. So we could select kind of, and I'll just add, let's say we have different MIDI controllers here. So let's say as we're working on, I'll just draw in some more MIDI controls. So we could choose to have two different selection modes. I could select as selected. So if I want to take the range there and get rid of it, we could undo. We could also at this point say, I want to select, just the notes, but we could say, do a full selection or as selection from the info line. Or if we wanted to do a full selection, hold down the control, hold down the, give hold down Control or Command plus the Shift key, and that will select everything. Let's say in this case I wanted everything selected except for my modulation. Tap on the Control key and then you could deselect that. So now that I have that, I can move those particular notes. Now let's take a look at some kind of typical range editing things that are super nice. So let's say I select the range here of one note, one beat, and I have 3/16 notes. Now notice I don't have the 4th 16th note. And what would happen before if I selected the notes and I duplicated the notes, they go right after each other, but it doesn't maintain its relationship to the beats. So as I come over here, I'm going to now select the range of time. And now at this point I could say, let's just duplicate. And now it's going to maintain that relationship of that range of time versus the notes. So as we just come over there, so very easy to duplicate. Let's say we want to split notes. So if I have long notes and I just wanted to get rid of the notes in the middle there, I could just hit the delete key. If I wanted to take a particular range, let's say I have beat selected as my quantized value. I have a lot of notes. I have like a 2 measure long note here. So as I look at the particular note, I'm going to select this range. I hit Shift X. That will split. We can see the velocity be added. I'm going to hold down my right arrow key to move the range. Hit Shift X, hit Shift X, Shift X, move. All right, and we talked about that persistency of switching from the range to the selection tool. So now I'm going to switch to the selection tool, move those notes up, go back to the range tool, right arrow, switch to the selection tool, move down, go back to our range tool, selection tool, and now we could just come over here and have very creative range editing. Now once we have the range editing done, I could also come over here and again just Shift plus X like we saw before. So that will create new notes that will be retriggered. I could erase those particular notes if I hold down, I think it's Command Option or Control Command plus Shift plus X. That will take this range, delete it in time, and move all of these notes over to the left. Or if you wanted to say, I like this particular range, I want to kill these notes here, the start and end of the notes, but keep this selected range, you could come over and go to range and choose crop. And do it right. Let me just take that range. And again, go to range to crop. Oh, it was already. And now like the ends and the start of the note that were outside of the selected range will be gone just that easily. So a lot more flexibility for MIDI editing with the range tool for MIDI CCs. So if you want to say, oh, I like that, hold down your Alt or Option key, make a copy. I want to take that range and move it up or down. I want to select globally. I want everything except for this CC to be selected, or I have this selected, this particular range. Use your up down keys to select different components as well. So a great addition to the MIDI editing paradigm. Now the next thing we'll take a look at is going to be our multi-part MIDI editing. So when we take a look at this, we'll say let's come over and listen to a quick example here. So when we're doing orchestral projects or large film projects, we're often looking at multiple MIDI parts within the key editor. And this paradigm has really shifted with with Cubase 13 in that we have a multi-part editor. So we'll just kind of listen to this particular piece. Let me just switch my transport mode here quickly. Okay, so as we look at this, all right, so we'll just listen. Okay, so I want to look at my bassoon. I'm going to go to my full screen view. All right, now as we work with this, and just change my transport start mode behavior again. So as we work with this again, we want to be able to look at other parts. So one of the things that we could do is we could see tracks, and there's, just like we had a new inspector in the project window, there's a new kind of visibility inspector. So as we look at our visibility inspector, we could say, and we have this track, so we can see kind of our track overview. Now as we do this, we could just select different events, and we could click on the checkbox, and then we could select those particular events. So now I could see my flute and my bassoon. Now sometimes you see a checkbox and sometimes you see a square. And what is the difference between the checkbox and the square? So when I look at this, so when we see our square, and what we're seeing is the parts on the project window themselves. So when we see our square, we can see that we're only going to, I'll turn off my oboe. When we go here, I don't see the notes in this particular event. I see the notes only in this event. So if we go to kind of our parts, we could choose to have all parts. We have active parts, but we could choose all parts on the active track. So when we see this little dot, if we wanted to see all of the MIDI data on all of the tracks, or on all of the events on that particular track, we just turn it on, and now we could see this part as well. So we could, and then as we click here, we could actively edit. So let's say again, I want to see my flute and the bassoon. So we're listening to it. Now let's say I only want to hear what I'm seeing. So we could go to our solo mode, and we could go to solos, and we could say solo and follows the part editing mode. So now we're only hearing what we're seeing. So if I wanted to bring in like my oboe part, or let's say we'll just, so this way we could change our solo behavior. So, but let's say we also now we see our flute and bassoon. So we could have check marks, but we could also see that we could have different parts highlighted here. So let's say I'm going to highlight my flute part. So we'll come over here, and we could also just come right over here and choose to see only particular instruments. If we hold down, I think it's shift, we could see only particular instruments. So as we want to do this, so let's say now at this point we could again choose our different events. So like, and as we want to come over here, let's say, okay, I want to do my oboe and my bassoon. So we'll go ahead and listen. So I have my bassoon selected here on the right hand side, and what that means is that part is selected on our project window. So I could select that right there, and let's say as we are playing along, I see that my bassoon stops. I'm going to just hit record. And what we could do now is everything that when we had our oboe stop, when we see the bassoon here underlined, what we do is, as I hit record, the bassoon part will be recorded. So at this point, I could just record directly within the editor and see what is going on, and record right in there. And let's say those parts may not even be selected. So I'm going to come over here and let's choose to look at, I'm going to select the string parts here. And our string parts will respond dynamically to our modulation wheel. But let's say I don't want to necessarily look at them. So I'm going to come over here and say we'll uncheck them, but we'll still leave them selected. So while I'm looking at my wind parts, we'll just come over and say, so we hear all the parts. And if I hit record, I could use my modulation wheel and write in the modulation data on those particular events. So once we come here, we could just choose those particular events to write and record data, even if they're not visible. And we could just come over here again and just say, okay, I want to take these particular parts and I want to take all of my strings. And again, just write those, and we could pick our different components right here. So what this turns into is more of kind of like an editing environment as opposed to editing one particular part. So if I look at see my track here, these are the tracks that are on the event. If I come over, I make an edit here. Let's say I erase that part in my flute part. I erase it, it's gone on the project window. I move this particular event, hold down Alt or Option, drag it, it's automatically populated right there. So any of the edits that I do here, I can automatically see. And as I add more parts, we can do, where it's appropriate, we could do arranging and editing kind of globally at the event level or directly on the part level as you see fit. So this way, and you could pick kind of like the different modes here. So you can say, show only the active track. So I can say, okay, let's go here. And when I want to see this, or we could choose to see all visible tracks. So this way we could navigate quite easily. If we have lanes on MIDI, so let's come over here and let's just look at and say we have different lanes. So we have one part that's stacked on top of another event. At this point, we could just say, let's look at our different MIDI lanes. And I can say, okay, this was lane 2, this is lane 1, and we could just switch between different MIDI lanes within the particular editor as well. So, and even if we wanted to do something like, okay, I want to look at all of my Iconica stuff, and let's look only at our, let's say we go back to our flute and bassoon, just like we were doing our step entry before, we could say, okay, I'm going to select my flute as well. I make sure that the flute is highlighted here, and I wanted to do step entry. I could say, let's go directly activate step entry just like we did before. And if I wanted to do step entry on multiple parts, again, I could just come over, let's say before these events start right here, we will select both of those events and we could do step entry on our multiple events. So if we look at just our flute part, we could do that, or just look at the bassoon part and see all of your, so you could kind of take these new modes. So again, think of this not as just editing a particular track or event, but this is more of an environment that you could get all of your different tracks into quite easily, so that as you look at all of your events, I remember hanging out with Pinar Toprak, and she told me once, she's like, oh, and she has just a dedicated screen for her key editor, wonderful film composer. And she's like, I see this screen more than my children, and I really love my children. It was just a quote that kind of stuck with me. But now, instead of going out to select other parts, switching between different parts, we can just do all this right here within one particular editor. Now, as we want to also look at different parts, we can come over here and choose different visibility options. So this way you can say, I want to see these 4 parts, I want to see these 16 parts. We could have those as different visibility configurations. As we look at other parts, let's say, this also is applicable to, for working with, let's say, drums. So let's come over here. Let's say we have a multi-track drum performance, where maybe like the kick, snare, hi-hat are all on different MIDI lanes. So now I could select these events. We'll double click, and we could look at this in our drum editor. So let's just say we'll go to edit to our drums. So we'll go to MIDI to our drum editor. And now we could see, again, when we go to our visibility, I want to see, my kick, snare, and at this point we could just say, okay, I don't want to see, so we could just see our multi-track drum parts. So we can say, okay, I want to see all of my different drums, and I could edit them together instead of seeing them all in separate windows. So we could say, okay, let's make this, we're going to edit our shaker, let's go to our hi-hat, let's go to the clap, and we could select our different parts and edit and see multiple events converge directly in one particular editor screen. All right, now the samples that you've been listening to in the Schubert piece here are all coming from Iconica Sketch. So let's take a look at Iconica Sketch. When we look at this is a library that comes with Cubase. It's going to be, it was recorded at the Funkhaus in Berlin in coordination with Orchestral Tools. So they've done a lot of wonderful orchestral instruments. And as we want to look at a particular instrument, we'll just come over here. We'll see, and we'll just go to, let's say, our flute part. So we have, a lot of, so there's 76 musicians recorded, 34 orchestral instruments. It's going to have like the correct seating was all taken into account. It's 16,000 samples. And again, it's under 5 gigabytes, so it's not a huge in size. When you have it installed, you can just come over here. You'll see Iconica Sketch. You'll see just kind of your full orchestral instruments. And one of the great things is, again, like the if you wanted to adjust the control of it, let's come over here to just like our wind parts. And I will select, or the string parts here. And as we play, to get kind of the natural articulations, I could use my modulation wheel. So sorry about that. So I'll just come over here. Let's just use our string parts here. So I'll just solo like one instrument here. So just using your modulation wheel. Now, one of the things that's always problematic with a lot of orchestral libraries is you have to, hope that someone has made an expression map for you, that they've kind of done all of the hard work for that. But one of the great things with being a typical instrument is we go to, let's say we're in our editor, we go to Note Expression, our expression map, and we could automatically import key switches. So this will automatically find all of the articulations that are available, and when we go to our key switch here and look at it, we could see all of the articulations that are available. So as we listen to this particular instrument, we can just say, so if I want to be spiccato, and let's say we'll just make it go to legato. I'll catch it. And again, just using the modulation wheel for that level of realism. So at this point, you could just have all of your articulations. You could have those, immediately appear in the score editor. So you're getting a 5 GB super high quality orchestral instrument directly with Cubase 13. As always, there are lots of new content that are available. So if you come with different sound sets, so when you go to your Cubase 13, there's different loops that are available online that you could, within the Steinberg download assistant. But, don't just download every loop. Go to your My Products, go into Cubase 13, and then you'll see a number of different libraries that are available. So if we want to come over here, let's get to our sounds and loops. Some of the new collections you'll see are going to be the analog world. So we'll just kind of audition a couple of different samples from the libraries. So wonderful loops to work with. If you wanted to go to cinematic, they call it cinematic electronic, you can come over here. So what you see in a lot of different and all this content is free to use. So let's say we want to go to sound effects, or you want to go to synth lead. So again, all free to use, all available to you. There's also delicatessen. So we come over here. So a lot of great hip hop stuff. If you want to go to Midnight Dance, more dance oriented. And let's go ahead and look at it's called soulful R&B vocals. So different little vocal phrases.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm hooked on. You did something that I want, something that bling.
So all sorts of great stuff to kind of work and use within your song, and also just kind of great inspirations if you need to do something quickly. Again, all those are royalty free. Don't have to worry about that coming back to bite you if you get a big hit record with it. Something else that's been included as an add-on for Cubase is going to be Spectral Layers 1 version 10. So we'll come over and take a quick look at that. So let's say we want to unmute. I have the full Spectral Layers license on mine, but what this is doing, what's really incredible about it is once we go into our Spectral Layers editing, So say I want to take this particular event here. We'll go to no extension, select it, and let's come over here to, and what I want to do is just take this, and we could unmix, and with the Spectral Layers one we could unmix vocals, and there's, you know, before it was a pretty astonishing algorithm, but with version 10 it's improved, and there's a lot of kind of AI processing that's going on with this. So with the full version of Spectral Layers, which you can purchase and, you know, check out the trial version too, it's, you know, just an amazing program for doing all sorts of, like, getting rid of guitar squeaks, getting into, you know, removing different things, removing bleed. You know, so if someone was singing and you needed to do like de-reverbing, so lots of amazing like problems that you run into in audio editing. Because what Spectral Layers does is, instead of just editing like an entire WAV file, what it's going to do is you could break apart the frequencies, and it could, through AI, look at different patterns and say, okay, we need to take this out, or I need to do transcription. So you get kind of the Spectral Layers 1, which is, you know, we'll think of it as a subset of the Pro or Elements functions, but still, like, for extracting the vocal from a project, I think it's the best algorithm that's currently available. So we'll just go ahead and take a quick listen to it here, where we're going to do just a whole song. And this is, I often make the analogy of unbaking a cake, so that we could just come over and say, okay, let's come and listen to particular elements. And, you know, how many times going through, like, I'm going through old recordings I did when I was, you know, 30 years ago, and I want the guitar solo to be a little softer, this to be a little louder. Spectral Layers is the tool that could allow you to take something that was kind of baked together and take the eggs out of the cake after it's been made, and, you know, sometimes put it back into the shell intact. So it's good to take a quick listen to. We're almost done here. So just taking this particular file, all right, so now we will come over here. So we'll play the file just as kind of a reference point for you. Make sure I don't kill you volume-wise. And what it's done, and since it's called Spectral Layers, it creates layers. So if I wanted to now mute the vocal, and let's solo the vocal. Even the delays and reverbs that are on the voice are automatically included. So listen to it together. So again, we'll hear like those little delay throws. And once we've done this separation, so this algorithm for extracting the vocal has significantly improved in version 10, but I can now even just take that file, the vocal file, and just drag it out into the project window and just have it isolated. So now this file doesn't have the vocals in it, this one does. So really incredible for working on stuff like that. Let's see if I can show you one last thing. So let's go over, I think we still have this, let's just go to a project here real quick. I thought I had this all prepared, but may have accidentally erased the files right before. So one of the other plugins that's really creative that's been included is just a vocoder. So I'm going to, let's take this particular file, this lead vocal.
To ferry us home.
So again, we had that mono stereo switch. So I'll just take this file, and what I want to do now is we'll take this dry
You
vocal,
look my way and you're hot.
and I'm going to come over to and we'll just open up the vocoder plugin, and you'll find it under pitch shift. And I'm going to add a MIDI track. So we'll say, okay, let's add a MIDI track. And now that we come over here, we'll say, okay, let's just do for the inputs for this, we could choose that I want the output of this track going to the vocoder in. And for my MIDI, I could choose all MIDI inputs. So now if we just wanted to have this MIDI track automatically start to play the vocoder. So I could just play like real-time MIDI in or take a MIDI track. I'm so in love with you, just like a long, long time ago. So again, kind of a built-in vocoder, really wonderful for creative effects, something that we had in a long, long time ago. Cubase has kind of been brought back. So now if we kind of just take a quick look and think about, we've seen a lot of information. So, I mean, we're over like 2 hours and 10 minutes of just new features in Cubase 13. So but again, I think one of the central themes is, again, looking at, providing and having access to more information in less space and easier to access. And it's a great balance. We're going to see, a lot of functions for creative use. Now, let's say, you wanted to just think about like cutting edge technologies. So again, MIDI 2.0 support, the hybrid CPU optimizations for like the Intel i9 processors. So you could take advantage of different processing loads. You're going to have on the Windows platform, the Windows compliant multi-Windows handling, the improved video engine. If you're doing like maybe hip hop and EDM music, think of like the sampler track with the envelopes, being able to do vocal chops, the vocoder plugin, the chord pads, putting in the chords with step entry, the MIDI step input. Let's go to like the hit point navigation so that you can make your edits directly on the beat, the range editing in the MIDI, Spectral Layers 1 for being able to extract vocals. If you're recording bands and musicians, we could come up, like, let's say it's more of a traditional studio format where musicians are coming in. You're going to have quicker access to all of the mixer controls, all of the parameters here on the left-hand side. So every function in your mix console, you could just access right here. So as you select different tracks, they're all coupled together. And again, that streamlined consistency of the user interface. You're going to have the commonly requested plugins that people have wanted, classic EQs, more flavors of compressors, test tone generator, vocoder, the vocal chain, having up to 16 different processes for vocals. One of the most common instruments that people have the hardest time figuring out all the processing. Instead of loading up 16 different plugins, do it all from within one plugin with the vocal chain. And if we were to think about composers, more flexibility with editing with the range selection, the multi-part MIDI editing, track versions for video tracks, being able to export video or replace the audio into video, the new video engine for better performance, and of course coming with now Iconica Sketch. So all those different aspects are just going to be included. And we think about like the little things like, the transport modes, the zoom modes, being able to zoom anyway using the mouse scroll wheel. Those little things that collectively add up to hundreds or thousands of little extra clicks in your process. They've gone through and really optimized workflows in so many ways. You're going to have the high quality plugins, MIDI plugins that are been overhauled, So you just start to think about all those different things that you could do. And some people go, oh, what is Cubase best for? And again, it's such a broad user base that, Steinberg, has to come up with a great job of not only adding functionality, but making sure that the functionality isn't so overwhelming that it's unobtainable, that people don't use the functions. So it's a really great balance of design. It's very modern looking, and that's just a quick overview, and we could show more, but we just on new features, and people say, oh, I just saw comments, there's not a lot of new features, but, we just spent 2 hours and 15 minutes of just new features found in Cubase 13. So again, it is, currently available. The Steinberg online shop is, back to life with our new provider. It seems to be working really well. And just a quick note, we will be having our normal live stream starting Tuesday. So as you have questions, as you're experiencing it, feel free to send an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. But we hope you enjoy taking a look at the new functions and features in Cubase 13. And we'll just make sure, and we'll be going through our typical questions next Tuesday and Friday. And if you're new to these live streams, we do the live streams on Tuesdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. We will be seeing, the U.S. will be changing our clocks this weekend. So if we are off 1 hour before, so check the time if you go to youtube.com/Cubase, check the time and see just to make sure what time we start. But we look forward to answering all of your Cubase 13 questions. I want to wish everyone a wonderful weekend, and we will see you back on Tuesday. Enjoy your Cubase 13. Goodbye.